where we talk about how what you consume, from food to drugs and ideas, influences who you become. I'm your host, Nick Jikomis, and I have a background in academic science, independent research, and writing, and I'm the creator of the Mind to Matter podcast and Substack page. I got a PhD in neuroscience from Harvard University, where I studied the neurobiology of feeding behavior, and before that, I studied evolutionary genetics at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. On normal episodes of the podcast, I talk mainly with scientists, academics, and other experts about topics that interest me as a biologist, ranging from neuroscience to metabolism, evolution, animal behavior, and the effects of drug, food, and biotechnology. This episode is part of a special sub-series where I talk to independent scholars who are often not affiliated with major institutions like universities, but who I believe have interesting perspectives. These conversations are often more multidisciplinary in nature, connecting my areas of scientific interest with subjects spanning social psychology, culture, religion, history, and the rise and fall of civilizations, areas which may sometimes be more taboo, controversial, or outside the Overton window of popular discourse. These episodes are available in full to paid subscribers on the Mind to Matter Substack page or my YouTube channel. If you're hearing this version, you are a paid subscriber, and I thank you for your support. With that, I hope you enjoy the conversation. All right, Stephen Rofrano, can you tell everyone a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm also known as Really Tan Man on Instagram and Twitter, and I am the CEO and founder of Ancient Crunch. And we make traditional snack recipes, fried in tallow, organic grains, et cetera, et cetera. No preservatives, no fake stuff. Just crunchy carbs the way they were meant to be served. Notably masa chips, which is a tortilla chip, and recently we launched Vandy Crisps, which is potato chip.
Mhm. When you say the way they're meant to be served and you say traditional foods, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, so good question. There are a few ways to define this. One easy way to define it is foods that are made with, say, pre-industrial methods and ingredients. Another way of saying this is, could you make this thing in an electricity-free world or a
Mhm.
petroleum-free world even, and not only just, for the ingredients themselves, but your whole supply chain, your whole manufacturing method. Do you need modern industry to be able to make that food? Or could you make it, outside of a campfire on a farm in medieval Europe, or could your great great grandma in the Midwest, who was a frontierswoman, be able to make it with what she could find in her cupboard? Um, that's one way to define it. It's easy enough, works for me.
Mhm. And so why do you focus on those types of foods? How did you even get moving in this direction as a person and as a entrepreneur?
Yeah. So I suppose it goes back about 10 years when I first started becoming interested in personal health in general. Um, for I basically had to cook for myself. The summer after freshman year, I was doing a study abroad in Europe where there are no dining halls. And of course, growing up, my mom had always cooked everything I ever ate. And so having to cook for myself, I started to inquire, well, what should I actually be cooking? And given for the first time in my life, insight into the entire journey of food from grocery store to kitchen to plate to mouth to, down the drain, so to speak. I could see how food affected me in a way that I hadn't been able to before. And then focused on the fact that, hey, if I eat these things make me feel better and those things make me feel worse. And I don't like feeling bad and I like feeling good. So I should try to do more of the things that make me feel good and less of the things that make me feel bad.
Hmm.
And that started, I suppose, this whole rabbit hole, as they say, of like trying to figure out what actually made me feel good and,
Mhm.
how to do more of that. And it turned out that all the things that were good were the types of things that were very traditional from the previous
Hmm.
definition.
And when you say so, in terms of just your personal journey, I'd love if we
Yeah.
could get like an example from your past for what you're talking about. And when you say feel good, my sense is you probably don't mean feel good in the sense of if I eat a Snickers bar, it tastes good. I
Yeah,
think you
yeah, no,
probably mean
I
something
certainly do
else.
not. Yeah.
Yeah.
So to give a bit more clarity, if that's what to go down there. When I was a kid, I was not the most how people say they have a weak constitution, or some people say,
Yeah.
or like
Yeah.
someone has a weak constitution or a strong constitution. I had a weak constitution. I always have seasonal allergies. I can never be more than a few feet from a box of tissues. I would often get nauseous and throw up and have
Mhm.
all sorts of stomach issues. When I was in eighth grade, I got the swine flu. That was the thing back then.
Hmm.
And then 2 weeks later, I got the regular flu. And it was like, what? Like, this is just happening. This shouldn't
Hmm.
be happening to a supposedly healthy, able-bodied person. Um, so that was my childhood, right? It made me not able to do outdoor sports like most normal kids. There are a whole bunch of effects, positive and negative of this. But it was always something I lived with, and it was always something I just thought was like, oh, that's who I am. I never really paid much attention to it. I'm like, oh,
Hmm.
I
You
just
were just
need,
born that way.
yeah, I was born that way. I just need tissues all the time. I can't go outside in the spring, otherwise I'll die. That's just who I am. And so, one specific thing was when I first started cooking for myself in the aforementioned post freshman year sojourn in Belgium. I just stumbled upon the paleo diet and upon the recommendation to not eat rice. And so rice was something that I had eaten a ton of as a kid because my family's Italian, but very early on, my mom discovered I was gluten intolerant. And
Hmm.
so obviously that posed a big challenge for an Italian woman's culinary endeavors. So I just ended up eating a ton of rice as a kid, rice everywhere. Instead of
Hmm.
pasta, rice, instead of bread, rice, 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 rice. And the paleo diet said don't eat rice. And I'm like, huh, that's weird. I'd never not eaten rice, so I'll try it. And within about 2 weeks of me doing this, my lifelong congestion, nose runny bullshit basically disappeared.
Hmm. And when you say rice, is this mostly white rice, brown
White
rice?
rice.
Does it?
Yeah.
Okay, white rice.
And I'm not saying white rice is bad for other people by
Yeah,
any means.
yeah. But for
Um,
you, that was
for
clearly
me,
a trigger.
yeah, and that was like what showed me like, oh wow, food is powerful. So like the whole idea of, oh, this is who I am, born that way,
Hmm.
was called into question because if I can like do a certain different set of things and experience a different set of outcomes, then clearly I'm not born this way. Clearly there's some like proximate cause of this, symptom. Um, and that was what sort of triggered the subsequent obsession with optimizing it at every step of the way.
And so, okay, so you have this experience with rice. Did you dig into? Do you have any sense for? Like, obviously, you just know empirically. Okay,
Yeah.
rice is a trigger for you with respect to like your allergies and stuff. Were you able to dig deeper and figure out what it was about the rice or anything like that?
You know, funny because this is like the first thing that ever caused me to question anything about health. I honestly have no freaking clue.
Hmm. Hmm.
I have no idea. Um, Brown rice is full of arsenic and other heavy metals due to the way that it's grown, and the fiber is very indigestible and causes digestive stress. Um, White rice is certainly a nutrient void food, uh,
Yeah, it's mostly
but
just carbohydrate.
it's mostly just starch. Yeah. But as far as I'm aware, I've never heard of anyone else talking about this or any other research about like rice containing something that causes some allergic reaction.
Hmm.
Um, I couldn't tell you. I mean, the best theory I have is that rice is not a widely consumed part of my particular ancestral diet,
Mm.
and thus maybe there's some incompatibility. There's a common old wives' tale, which is like if you eat too much of something as a kid, you develop an intolerance to it.
Hmm.
I don't know if that's true. I doubt that it's true, but maybe in this case it happens to be true. Um, but yeah, I could not tell you. I don't even
Yeah,
tell people
yeah,
not to eat rice because
yeah.
like it's just like, that's just a me thing.
Hmm. Yeah, I think I don't think we know uh what's going on in detail in all cases for things like this, but one thing that is probably true to some extent for some people is that so on the one hand, we've got to explain why allergies are so common, why food allergies have become more common, but on
Hmm.
the other hand, why they can be very different. From you have this reaction to rice, someone else is allergic to peanuts, and so forth.
Hmm.
And it's like how is it that there's that kind of diversity, but at the same time everything's drifting in the direction of more people have more food allergies?
Hmm.
And one plausible hypothesis there, at least in my view, is that if as a child you've got, say, leaky gut or something like that for whatever reason, and you've got
Hmm.
particles of food that aren't being absorbed, they're actually getting in by other means because your gut has been disrupted. Your immune system can then detect chunks of food and start to react to them as if they were pathogens. And that simultaneously explains why, as a population, we're drifting in this sort of more and more allergy direction. But
Hmm.
there's this idiosyncratic nature to it where one person has a rice incompatibility, another person has a
Right.
nut sensitivity, and so forth.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of different potential causes. It's very interesting because, well, there's also intolerances and allergies, which are separate things as well.
Mm-hmm.
My sister is like vaguely allergic to peanuts, but like why and why am I not? That's
Hmm.
obviously the rates of that are increasing. And one of the things that we do know is that children who grow up on farms or in rural areas have lower rates of allergies than people who
Yes.
grow up in more sterile suburban urban environments. Uh, so one of the theories is that because it's similar to the autoimmune thing, it's like if there are not enough uh, innocuous foreign invaders, but foreign nonetheless, for the body's immune system to practice, getting rid
Yeah.
of, then the
Yeah.
body starts to turn on things that are not, harmful at all. And then we end up getting seasonal allergies and whatever else. So, like the dirtiness of the rural world, in the sort of classical sense of the term dirty, dust, pollen, you know, dog hair, whatever. That strengthens a child's immune system. And it's worth noting that I did not grow up with pets. I grew up in a suburban house. My mom was a very neat woman, so the house was very clean. So there's definitely something to this, I believe. And further, leaky gut. While an interesting theory, there's also other issues going on too. For example, oral allergy syndrome. Like certain people, there are certain proteins in various plants that will just make their mouth itch. They're not allergic. They
Hmm.
don't need an EpiPen. They're not going to the hospital. Um, you like some of the ones that are common in this are high in this protein are apples and carrots. Um, and there was a point in my life where if I eat apples or carrots raw, my mouth would itch. And it's literally instantaneous. It's not like it went through my gut first.
Hmm.
And also noteworthy, if you cook them, then the oral allergy symptoms go away because the particular proteins that cause this are denatured.
Hmm.
And so applesauce is fine, but raw apples would make my mouth itch. The thing is, I don't have that anymore.
Hmm.
And I've noticed that at times of like greater inflammation in my life, I will notice those types of things more. Same thing with stone fruits. So cherries and peaches and plums, they're all stone fruits. They belong to the class of fruits that basically have a pit that looks like a little hard brain with the wrinkles in it. Um, at some point, probably 3, 4 years ago, those fruits made my mouth itch in a similar way. And at this point, I can eat those things and my mouth doesn't itch. So it's a very the thing that I have to explain that is that inflammation in general is sort of like a health bar, like a video game sort of health bar.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
have a finite amount of ability to deal with inflammation, and the more inflamed you are for whatever reason, and there's many causes of inflammation, the less able you are to deal with additional inflammation. Eventually, you like run out of inflammation capacity, and then everything causes some sort of like allergic reaction. So whether it's pollen in the spring, or stone fruits, or peanuts, or rice, or dog hair, um, or apples, or carrots, or literally could be anything, stress even. There was a point in time where I was in the early days of running the business where I was very stressed out for obvious reasons. And like I would just sneeze so hard that my shoulders and my neck hurt. It's like there's no reason for this. Like I live in the same house now. It's not
Hmm.
like it got cleaner or something. It's just
Hmm.
like you just get so stressed and there's just so much inflammation that you just can't deal with it.
Hmm.
And there's a lot of things that can limit or increase your capacity to deal with those influences. But yeah, it's certainly people are becoming less and less resilient as my personal story attests, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and at this point, there's so many of these. It's so obvious at this point that as a society, as a population, we are drifting into unhealth in various ways and have been for some time. So clearly, something or many things, as it may be, are dysfunctional or about the environment we're in, the environment that we've created, presumably. And so you've had this personal. So for you, this has been a personal journey. You had this experience where you suddenly had to cook for yourself. You sort of just figured out through trial and error that you had these sensitivities. This led to some further, intellectual awakening that seemed to have caused you to look into this stuff more explicitly and in more detail.
Mhm.
And among other things, one of the things you're sort of known for that you focus on are various aspects of processed and ultra processed foods. The one that perhaps you focus on the most, or at least I've seen you produce the most content for, are the so-called seed oils.
Of course. Yes.
For the,
Cursed be they.
yes, yes. I want to start out pretty basic here for people because I think there's quite a wide distribution of knowledge here. Some people know a lot. Some people think they know a lot. Some people don't know very much at all. But these things
Mhm.
are ubiquitous. They're all over in the food supply. So let's just start basic. What are seed oils,
Sure.
and what should people know about them on a very basic level?
Yeah, seed oils are pretty much exactly what they sound like. It's oil from seeds, and it sounds innocuous, but most seeds, oil seeds, as they're called in the industry, the types of seeds from which seed oils are derived, do not actually have a ton of oil in each individual seed. Extracting and aggregating the oil requires a vast quantity of input seeds.
Hmm.
For example, corn oil, which is a common seed oil, requires several dozen bushels of corn or ears, sorry, of corn to make 1 tablespoon of corn oil.
Hmm.
Similarly, with sunflower oil, you require pounds and pounds of sunflower seeds to get 1 tablespoon of seed oil, so on and so forth. And so the fact that the seeds don't have that much oil in them is is why, in order to get at these oils, a whole host of industrial processing
Hmm.
is required and implemented.
Yeah.
So
So
that
basically,
means,
you need a very large mass of starting material, and then you need to squeeze. You need to come up with mechanisms that literally like kind of squeeze or pull that oil
yeah.
out so it can be concentrated.
Yeah, and then that process, there's a whole bunch of refining steps because that's like a very artificial thing to go do. So there's a whole bunch of refining steps, deodorizing and bleaching and purifying and all sorts of chemically induced or chemically moderated steps. And then the end result is the seed oils, also called vegetable oils, or more commonly called vegetable oils, that are ubiquitous in the American diet. So the first thing to know, or I guess the second thing to know about seed oils, is because of the technology required to produce them, they are an inherently non-traditional, or in other words, artificial food,
Mhm.
according to like the definition that we went over in the
Yeah,
beginning,
because
which is
before industrial technology was developed, there's no way
no.
people could possibly do this.
Correct. And so obviously there are oils, right? Olive oil
Mhm.
exists, but olive oil is not a seed oil because the olive is a fruit. And so
Yeah.
the oil from an olive comes from the flesh, which is the fruit of the olive. Similarly, avocado oil comes from the green part, the fruit
Hmm.
of the
Hmm.
avocado, um, and so on and so forth.
Hmm.
So not all oils that are derived from plants are seed oils, but the vast majority of the oils that are consumed, the commodity oils, vegetable oils, whatever you want to call them, are derived from seeds. They are the seed oils that we're talking about. And the third thing worth noting about them is that they now represent about 20%, 20 to 25% of the daily caloric intake of the average American,
Hmm.
which is insane because this is, again, a thing that did not exist
Yeah.
150 years ago.
I mean, for traditional peoples, pre-industrialization, I mean, even early industrialization, I'm not sure there would have been a population of people anywhere on the planet in history up until very recently that consumed one thing as that much of their diet.
Certainly one novel thing, right? Like, I mean,
Yeah, yeah,
there are people always cherry pick some tribe that, oh, they only subsist on that weird nut from some tree and like
yeah, yeah.
eyeballs or something. Whatever. Someone will cherry pick a tribe. Um, but certainly 25% of the caloric intake is as much, if not more, than any other individual food item that people eat.
Hmm.
I'm pretty confident that's more than the calories people obtain from meat, for example. It's up there with the calories people obtain from sugar or bread or any other common ingredient.
Hmm.
And the thing about seed oils, of course, is that that is they are the most widely consumed artificial ingredient. Talking about traditional foods, seed oils, as bad as they are, what makes them so terribly pervasive and harmful and whatever is simply that they're consumed in that quantity. There are plenty of artificial ingredients. There's high fructose corn syrup, there's guar gum and freaking carrageenan and soy protein isolate and modified potato starch and red 40, and there's pesticides and preservatives and there's citric acid. There's all those things that you see on ingredient labels that are like, what the hell's that? None of them come close to being consumed in the quantities that seed oils do.
Hmm.
How, like, a pack of Skittles is what, like a milligram of red 40, you know? Whereas your common serving of French fries at McDonald's will have tablespoons of seed oils. So simply the quantity alone is one of the reasons that makes seed oils unique among all processed
Hmm.
food
Hmm.
ingredients, not only for
Yeah,
their particularly insidious effects, but because of how
yeah,
damn much we eat.
yeah. And I mean, and one of the things I like to do when I think about a subject like this, or when I'm talking to people about it, is um, there's two things I like to do to sort of anchor my thinking. So one is just, and this is sort of like a saying from the world of pharmacology, and and pharmacotherapy, the dose is often what makes the poison.
Mhm.
Just about anything you can think of will become bad for you if it's sufficiently concentrated. So there are so many examples. There's just many examples of this. Vitamin
Salt,
A, your body needs
water.
vitamin A,
Yep.
but at some point, if you overconsume vitamin A, it can start causing you serious problems.
Right.
So you should automatically be at least somewhat skeptical or interested to know more about anything that's been concentrated to this degree.
Right. It's an entire, like, there's no natural diet that could ever get you a quantity of the oils from seeds that you get
Mhm,
with seed oils, right? You'd have
mhm,
to eat, again, dozens of ears of corn. No
mhm.
one's eating dozens of ears of corn.
Yeah,
Like, you're
every
just not
meal.
doing that.
Yeah.
Um, so that's I would say, to answer the original question here, that is the basic understanding of seed oils. As far as why they're particularly bad, I mean, or mechanistically how they're bad, rather, like what they actually do. If you want me to get into that, we can, but that's a whole separate thing. But yeah, the summary from this section of the lecture, I suppose, is that seed oils are inherently artificial. Industrial technology is required to make them. They are a concentrated thing from some natural product, but industrially concentrated, and they are present in uh, far more abundant quantities in our diet than ever before. And they are the most widely consumed processed artificial food ingredient.
Mhm. And before we go into sort of what's in them and some of the metabolism and physiology stuff here,
Yeah.
I want to give one more anchor point for people because I always like to put these things in sort of evolutionary or ecological terms to help me
Mhm.
think about them when I'm first starting to evaluate, what do I think about different things. You said something that was interesting that I want to unpack, which is you made the distinction between seed oils, where you're, squeezing or extracting the oil from seeds, versus
Mhm.
things like avocado or olive oil, where the oil is coming from the fruit
Mhm.
of the plant. And that's a fundamental distinction because, with certain species specific exceptions, in general, plants want animals to eat the fruit, and that's why the fruit is composed in the way it has evolved to be made out of the sugars and things that it's made out of. It's
Very
trying to
good.
incentivize animals and creatures to eat it. And
Mhm.
in general, they don't want their seeds to be eaten. So they actually put stuff in the seeds, including a physical shell that provides a
Mhm.
physical barrier, as well as things that are chemical deterrents inside the seed that they're trying to dissuade most
Yeah.
organisms from eating the seeds. And that's worth knowing because that a priori, but without knowing anything else, that tells you that you're much more. It's much more likely that something like a fruit will be
Yeah.
good or for your body, or that you've adapted to it, than something like a seed.
Yeah, it's a very good point. Interestingly enough, the only three foods in nature that are actually designed to be food, as in for the consumption by another or even the same species, is the fruit, milk, and honey.
Hmm.
No other aspect of biology is designed to be
Mhm.
food.
Yeah, like
Like a
a cow
plant
is
does
not
not want to
making
lose.
muscle for the purpose of being eaten.
Yeah, yeah. No, cows don't grow like thigh muscles so that like a wolf can eat them, right?
Yeah,
They
yeah,
grow thigh muscles so they can walk around.
yeah,
But cows do make milk for the purpose of it being fed to another
yeah.
individual organism, namely, obviously, another cow. But whatever. We don't need to get into
Yeah.
vegan
And then
revision.
fruit makes sense
Apology.
because the plants want to get pollinated and spread around
Yeah,
that way. But what about honey? I don't know about that one. Why is
honey is milk for bees.
I see?
Oh, same
Okay,
thing. Yeah.
okay.
It is food for the larva of the new generation of
Mm,
bees.
I see.
So it's food for someone. Whether or not it was designed to be food for you is a more restrictive
Yeah,
categorization, but it
yeah,
was
yeah.
certainly designed to be food for something. Um, but nothing else. Plants need their leaves. Plants need their seeds. Animals obviously want to keep their bodily integrity intact.
Hmm.
And so that literally leaves milk, honey, and fruit. It's very
Hmm.
interesting.
Hmm. So okay, so we talked about like what seed oils are, where they come from. I don't think we need to go too much more into that, although there's some other aspects of that we might go into later. But now
Right.
let's talk about like what is in this oil. What is it made
Yeah.
out of, and what is it actually doing biologically?
Sure. So oils, as commonly understood, can contain fatty acids. It's a bunch of fatty
Mhm.
acids linked to a glycerol molecule, and a glycerol molecule has like ports, if you will, to plug in three fatty acids. And a fatty acid is a long chain of carbons with a bunch of hydrogens all around it,
Mhm.
and they can be different lengths. They can have different number of carbons relative to the different number of hydrogens, but fundamentally, it's carbons and hydrogens stuck around and they plug into these glycerol molecules, and that's called a triglyceride. which people may be familiar with, like tri meaning three, of course, and that is the fundamental component of an oil. Um, so these fatty acids come in three types. They are saturated, which is the highest number of hydrogens per, carbon that you could possibly have in that configuration. Monounsaturated, meaning there's one fewer hydrogen than theoretically possible.
Hmm.
And then there's polyunsaturated, which means there's two or more fewer hydrogens than theoretically could fill that molecule. And so different fats naturally contain different compositions of those types of fatty acids. And so, of course, within each category of fatty acids, there's different types of those fatty acids, but we don't really, I think, need to get into that. So the debate is, of course, between saturated fats, polyunsaturated fats, or sorry, saturated fats, monounsaturated fats, and polyunsaturated fats. Pretty much all animal fats, especially all mammal fats that we've ever consumed, are very high in saturated and monounsaturated fats.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, Pretty much most fruit oils, like olive oil and avocado oil, are high in monounsaturated fats, and almost all seed oils are very high, and fish oil in
Hmm.
particular are
Hmm.
high in polyunsaturated fats.
Hmm.
And with the saturation, the degree of saturation is important for a number of reasons. First, it dictates the freezing point or the melting point of the
Hmm.
fat that is constituted by it.
So that's why
People like
butter is solid at room temperature, but olive oil
butter is
or
solid,
yeah.
olive oil is liquid, but it will kind of get cloudy in the fridge.
Yep. Yep.
But vegetable oil, seed oils, polyunsaturated fats will not even remotely solidify in the fridge.
Hmm.
You can put olive oil in the freezer and it'll turn into a butter-like consistency, but seed oils will not do that.
Hmm.
Um, and that's because of the polyunsaturation. Basically, it's hard to explain geometrically, but the fewer hydrogens there are in this long chain, the more the molecules can bend around, and so the more wiggly they are,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
the more prone they are to being liquid at any given temperature. And so that's important because it comes up with like it corresponds to where and why that oil is found where it is in nature. So mammals are warm-blooded, and our bodies are hot enough to keep saturated fats like liquid.
Hmm.
If your fat in your body were to be hard, like, refrigerated butter, you'd not be able to move very well. So, because we're warm-blooded, our bodies can melt saturated fat, and that makes up most of, by default, the fat that's in our tissues. And
Hmm.
that's true of pretty much all mammals.
Yeah.
Um,
In contrast, an Atlantic salmon is swimming in cold water. They don't necessarily, and they're cold blooded. They don't
Cold-blooded.
really want as much saturated fat to compose their tissues.
No, if an Atlantic salmon's fat were composed of saturated fat, it would be like a frozen block of fish, and it would not be able to wiggle and move and swim. It would drown instantly. Um, so hence why the highly unsaturated fats that are found in cold water fish, hence why they're found there, right?
Hmm.
It's like
Yeah.
antifreeze. It prevents the fish from literally freezing into a block of butter, while underwater. And so you can start to see why different fats show up. It's not random. And then so
Hmm.
seeds, if we think about seeds, well, plants are not warm-blooded. Obviously, they don't generate their own heat. And often they're expected to germinate in the springtime in a place that's like temperate, right? Most of the seed oil plants that we're talking about, those types of seeds are from the plants that are grown in temperate climates. And those seeds need to be able to be flexible
Hmm.
underground in the springtime where it's cold and damp and whatever. And so if they had saturated fat in them, the germination won't be able to happen. The plant will be like frozen solid, basically. So the oils serve a similar kind of antifreeze function in the seeds. And so that should clue the listener into a fundamental incompatibility with humans and seed oils, which is that because we're warm-blooded, we don't need polyunsaturated fats to be able to, move around and exist.
Hmm.
They're not meant for us. They're meant for places that are environments that are much colder, and our internal body temperature is 98.6 degrees, is very warm. Um, so while that may clue you in on like why it's not necessary, the question of like why they're actually harmful
Hmm.
is, easily answered from this. um, when fats are saturated, fully saturated, those they don't have any breaks, in the molecule or like little bumps in the molecule, and so it's very hard to pull them apart chemically.
Hmm.
Um, as opposed to seed oils, the polyunsaturated fats have all these little breaks in the molecule. It's very easy for them to split apart, and in particular, that splitting apart in this context is called oxidation, which is a chemical reaction that occurs in the, with oxygen in the presence of heat. And the human body, of course, is full of oxygen and also heat. And that breaking apart of this molecule doesn't might not occur in a fish swimming in the Atlantic Ocean, but it very readily will occur
Hmm.
in the human whose internal body temperature is 98.6 degrees. So what we've covered so far is that the saturated fat that's supposed to be in our body fat is very stable at the temperature at which we exist, whereas the polyunsaturated fats are designed to, be act as an antifreeze in environments that are
Hmm.
colder. um, when they are heated and when there's oxygen available, they break apart. And the human body, of course, is hot and there's oxygen. And so introducing seed oils into that environment causes them to break apart. And the resulting molecules are not normal fatty acids. There's a whole class of hundreds of different inflammatory byproducts that could be broken apart. If you just do the geometry, like there's a bunch of different random crap that could come out of these things. And pretty much all of those byproducts are highly inflammatory to human biology. So nature works. It's designed very intelligently, if you will. Um, and when we put things that are meant to be in one place into somewhere else that they're not meant for, all sorts of problems can ensue. And that is, I would say, the root cause of all of the ills that seed oils are, blamed for nowadays.
Hmm. Yeah, and I want to maybe unpack some of this a little bit more.
Sure.
I don't know how much you know about the biology here, but when we say things like, we're going to be talking about inflammation a lot, and we're not saying this willy nilly. If you actually
Mhm.
look at the immune system and how it produces, so I'll just sort of get started here, and you can riff on this if you'd like. But
Sure.
inflammation is good and it's bad.
Mhm.
Inflammation needs to be spatiotemporally precise. You need to use inflammation when you need to get rid of a pathogen or to clear out damaged tissue. But then you need to shut it off because you
Mhm.
can damage yourself with inflammation. That's why chronic inflammation is such a problem. That's why we don't want the inflammation to, bleed to last longer than the infection needed to clear out the infection. We don't want it to happen in tissues where we don't need to be, cleared out. If I bruise my knee, I want the inflammation to go to the knee. I don't want it to be everywhere in my body. So the mechanisms that have evolved from the immune system are pretty beautiful and elegant if you actually look into them. There's things that go into making pro-inflammatory stuff happen, and there's things that happen that make anti-inflammatory stuff that happen. In other words, there's a balance of pro and anti-inflammatory components that are meant to be in balance at like a 1-to-1 ratio so that you can turn on and turn off inflammation in this sort of selective as needed manner. Um, and where that generally takes you when you start to look at this stuff with the seed oils, and I'll let you riff on this now, is we're putting into our bodies some of these pro-inflammatory components such that they're very much out of balance with the anti-inflammatory components, and that tends to at least some people would argue that's going to bias you
Yeah.
towards the direction of more inflammation and away from being able to shut it off.
Right. So the root, I think that's a brilliant summary of what's going on. Basically, inflammation is serves a purpose, just like everything in nature. But seed oils, again, the dose makes the poison. Too much inflammation, no good. Um, so one of the main things that happens as a byproduct of the seed oil breakdown, this oxidation reaction, it produces what are called reactive oxygen species, which are molecules that for more or less, the way you can imagine them, they're like little terrorist molecules. They just like blow up shit. They just tear apart whatever they see. Um, I'm sure there are better analogies, but here we are. So they go around and they have a very reactive like oxygen connected to whatever the hell is in the
Mhm.
molecule, and that pulls electrons away from molecules that they encounter. So it's like this little jackhammer molecule exposed in your sensitive tissues. And the first thing it hits, it'll pull an electron away. And
Mhm.
then that starts some chain reaction where some other molecule breaks down and maybe that produces other reactive oxygen species. And they go around and they, pull apart other molecules that are prone to being oxidized. And that continues to happen unless there's an antioxidant supply available. And there are
Mhm.
many antioxidants in nature and used in the body for various purposes. Vitamin E is one of them. Vitamin C is one of them. Glutathione is one of them. People may be familiar with all these. Um, Naturally speaking, when you have inflammation, your body like oxidative stress is often used as a synonym for this. you have a supply of antioxidants ready to kind of absorb the damage, clean up the very highly reactive electrons, and calm everything down.
Hmm.
What happens, of course, when you eat so many vegetable oils is that you increase the supply of things that can oxidize, but you're not in any way increasing the supply of antioxidants.
Mm.
So when they degrade, they are sort of free to roam around, without any, I guess you could say, law and order or like police checking on their
Yeah.
criminal behavior.
Yeah, I'm going to go a little off the cuff here. I'm not sure what the best metaphor would be, but I don't know if you reactive oxygen species, as their name suggests, they're highly reactive molecules. They are necessarily produced in the body as a consequence of how metabolism works. I don't know if I analogize them to like a firecracker or something. If I'm sitting in my home and I'm keeping a good home and it's clean and I'm throwing all my trash into the waste bin
Mhm.
and shutting it, if I throw a firecracker around randomly, like yeah, it's going to be annoying. It might scorch the wall a little bit, but most of the firecrackers aren't going to light the house on fire.
Sure.
But I don't know if I'm not taking care of the home and now paper towels are piling up
Mhm.
everywhere. Any given any given firecracker is much more likely to light something on fire, maybe even burn the house down in some
Yeah,
sense.
that is
Um,
a perfect
yeah,
analogy. Yeah, works.
and so what is I want to talk about some of the specific fatty acids here a little bit. So the most common the omega-6 fatty acids that we're about to talk about, those are the ones that are generally used to produce pro-inflammatory components of the immune system. Omega-6 fatty acids, pro-inflammatory in general.
Yeah.
The big one there is linoleic acid, right?
Yeah, that is the specific name of the specific fatty acid that comprises the plurality, or majority of fatty acids in most seed oils.
Mm-hmm.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so is there anything we should know about that one in particular, or is it just sort of in general all the omega-6 fatty acids are what we should think about as a category?
I mean, in general, I would think of polyunsaturated fats as the category. It just so happens that most of the seed oils contain linoleic acid. There are other omega-6 polyunsaturated fatty acids. There are other omega-3 polyunsaturated
Mhm.
fatty acids. Um, there and the controversy around them is actually much higher, if you will, because this is the things like EPA and DHA,
Mhm.
which are or ALA, alpha linolenic acid. EPA is eco something. I don't know the full names of all of them.
Ecosa hexapentanoic acid, I believe.
There, okay, there you go. What do we need me for?
Yeah, EPA, DHA, it's fish oil, fish oil.
Yeah, fish oil. ALA is the type of thing that are found in some seeds, commonly flaxseed and chia seed oil.
Mhm.
Um, those are omega-3 fatty acids, and some people are like, oh, omega-6 is bad, omega-3 is good. The reason why seed oils are bad is simply because the ratio of omega-6, which are bad, to omega-3, which are good, is out of balance. Um, this is kind of BS, in my opinion. If someone understands the oxidative mechanism of polyunsaturated fatty acids as such, um, how the lack of hydrogens cause these weak bonds that are able to split apart, yada yada yada. Omega-3 fatty acids are even more unsaturated, more prone to degradation in a similar fashion than the omega-6 fatty
Mhm.
acids. It's actually kind of nuts
Hmm.
how much worse they are. So like linoleic acid, I believe, has two double bonds, but I'm pretty sure DHA has something like five or seven
It's
double
several.
bonds.
Yeah, several. Um,
Like a
okay, so
lot more, which is
yeah.
a lot more propensity for oxidation.
Mm.
Um, which is one of the reasons people are like, oh, that's why you got to get clean fish oil that's fresh. And, the real good fish oil is kept refrigerated, or like flaxseed oil you can buy
Mhm.
at the health food store. It's refrigerated for this reason. Well, the funny thing about that is like you can keep it in a freezer. You can put it in a vacuum, keep it in a freezer in in complete darkness to preserve it. The minute it enters your body, which is full of oxygen and heat, no, it doesn't matter what you did to preserve it. It's going to experience the full wrath of oxidation, if you will, um, the minute it's metabolized inside of you.
Mhm.
So there's no real good way to store it, and storing it doesn't really matter. And similar people go about like, oh, seed oils are bad because they're in a deep fryer and they're heated repeatedly, and that's why they're bad. No, it doesn't matter. Like your body is hot enough and full of enough
Mm.
oxygen
Yeah,
to oxidize even the
yeah,
freshest of
sure. Yeah, it's
polyunsaturated fats.
yeah. One of the things I've sort of a curiosity to me is I do sometimes see people making this argument where like, oh yeah, if you deep fry things and you pre-oxidize the fatty acids, they'll often say yes, they're bad, but they're not necessarily bad if you're eating them fresh. And basically what you're saying is Well, they're eventually going to be oxidized inside of
Yeah,
you.
exactly. At the very least, even if they preserve their way all through your metabolism and they get deposited in your body fat for later use as energy, um, once your mitochondria go to burn that raw material, which is literally igniting it on fire with oxygen. It's a very controlled combustion reaction, but alas, it is a combustion reaction. Not many people realize this. Like in chemistry 101, you learn combustion is a hydrocarbon plus oxygen, O2, equals water and carbon dioxide. And you eat hydrocarbons, you breathe oxygen, you breathe in oxygen, and you exhale water vapor and carbon dioxide. You're doing combustion like this
Mm-hmm.
very second. It's literally combustion to burn the food that you're eating into energy. Obviously, the mechanisms are different. There's ATP involved, whatever. It's slower, it's more controlled, but the net result is the same. And so, okay, you go to burn your seed oils that have been supposedly safely stored in your body fat. That's when like there's no hiding anymore. That's when they're breaking apart and creating all these reactive oxygen species that your body can't handle or your mitochondria can't handle. And so Kate Shanahan's book about seed oils, which I highly recommend if you haven't read it already, it came out in June. It's called Dark Calories, and it's of course all about seed oils. Um, the way she describes it is very compelling. So you burn the seed oil, you burn the linoleic acid, whatever, in your mitochondria. As you do this, the oxidation reaction causes reactive oxygen species to break free. They go around oxidizing other molecules, which then it's like a chain reaction. You have this exponential growth in oxidation. And the mitochondria is this very delicate machinery. It's basically a turbine. And it sort of causes the turbine to explode because of all the chain reaction of oxidation components. It's like, I don't know, um, it's like putting like I don't know if this analogy makes sense, like gasoline in a freaking where whatever in a place where it's not supposed to go. You're like putting gasoline in a water filter or something. It's like
Mm-hmm.
literally causing it to spit out of control or high octane fuel in a place where it's not supposed to go. Um, you're putting propane in like a wood burning stove. You
Mm-hmm.
know,
Mm-hmm. And
the
so,
energy inside the reactor is so great, and the destruction so prevalent that it causes the whole thing to tear itself apart from the inside.
mhm.
I don't know if you've seen Iron Man the movie, like the arc reactor where they like overload the reactor and there's more electricity and the
Mhm.
thing
Mhm.
blows up from the inside. That's what's happening in your mitochondria.
Yeah.
And so part of the reason why this is so insidious is because the mitochondria over time learn that they shouldn't burn this stuff because it's toxic to them and they'll die. They'll blow themselves up. And so they see the fat sitting there, your body fat full of vegetable oil, full of linoleic acid, technically speaking. And they're like, nope, I'm not going to touch it. It'll hurt me if I do that. And so you're sitting over here, surrounded, swimming in a sea of corpulence made up of linoleic acid, eating linoleic acid, all these calories that cannot be burned by the mitochondria. And so your cells are starving at the same time that you're surrounded by fat. And that is the life of,
Mhm.
60, 75% of
Yeah.
Americans.
And I think, a lot of this stuff gets to, questions around it's not just about the balance of omega 6s and omega 3s. The absolute levels matter here. And the way that I think about this, at least, and I suspect you probably have a similar view, is that, you might think to yourself, okay, I understand that the omega 6s tend to get used to build pro inflammatory molecules that my immune system uses. The omega 3s tend to get used to build anti inflammatory molecules. Therefore, as long as they're in balance, I'm fine. So even if I'm consuming a lot of omega 6, if I just consume a lot of fish oil and get my omega 3 so they're in balance, I'll be fine.
Mhm.
But that doesn't actually work. And it gets back to this idea of ancestral diets and what we're adapted to from an
Yeah.
evolutionary perspective, because ancient humans didn't just get something close to a 1-to-1 ratio of these things. They got lower levels of these things in absolute terms than we eat today. And
Right.
the simple fact is that even if you're in balance, if you have a 1-to-1 ratio of omega 3s and 6s, even then, if you're consuming large amounts of them, the body's only going to use a fraction of those omega 3s to build the anti inflammatory components that you do need. The rest of them are then just going to sort of be left over and then be prone to what you were talking about in terms of oxidative stuff.
the real thing and talk about ratios that could actually protect you is like, okay, you want to go eat seed oils. The thing that matters is having enough antioxidants to be able to deal with all the damage they're going to cause. It's like,
Hmm.
okay, throw firecrackers around your house, um, provided you like have enough fire extinguishers and you're always constantly putting out fires. But like, you could do that, but
Yeah.
who
You're
wants to
also
freaking do
wasting
that?
energy. You're spending
Yeah.
that energy just putting out these little firecrackers when you could
Why
be
don't we
doing
just
something
not
else.
have the firecrackers and then we
Yeah.
don't need the fire hydrants or
Yeah.
fire extinguishers? Much easier. Um, and so yeah, the real of course the real issue of course is the oxidation that happens as a result of the seed oil ingestion. Seed oils, of course, being detached from any sort of natural antioxidants, which they do contain. Seeds keep their oils from oxidizing because they contain vitamin E.
Mm.
Like the most common source of vitamin E, of course, is from seeds.
Hmm.
Any
Yeah.
vitamin E supplement you can find, it comes from a seed.
Yeah. The seeds don't have the vitamins necessarily because they want to be good for us. They have the seeds to
Yeah.
prevent exactly this process from
Yeah,
happening
they
inside of
want
the
to
seed.
benefit from the antifreeze properties, like
Yeah.
being able to be liquid of polyunsaturated fats, but they could be oxidized too. So they have a corresponding amount of vitamin E,
Hmm.
which is of course stripped out in the
Yeah.
processing of
Yeah.
seeds into vegetable oils.
Yeah. And I suppose that's why you get antioxidants like vitamin E again and things like fish oil products and fish itself.
Yeah, they need it, and but oftentimes, if you take a vitamin E supplement, or if you're eating a whole food that contains vitamin E, that's great. I love whole foods. However, you're already trying to supply you're trying to supply extra vitamin E to deal with the linoleic or polyunsaturated fats you already have. And so any whole food source of vitamin E for the most part will contain vitamin E in addition to further like net new vegetable oils, net new polyunsaturated fats. And so you're not ever going to obtain a surplus amount of vitamin E from eating a whole food source.
Hmm.
Um, so this has huge implications for weight loss too, because if you're surrounded by body fat and it's full of polyunsaturated fats that your body doesn't want to burn because it knows that doing so will destroy its own mitochondria and create a whole bunch of toxic compounds, you can work out all you want, you can calorie restrict all you want. Your body ain't gonna burn that stuff. And if it does, the toxic flood that will be induced is far more painful than being obese to begin with. And so the real missing piece in the weight loss discussion is how do you safely clear out the built-up polyunsaturated fats that are in your body fat? How do you apply and use the proper amount of antioxidants? How do you, in a slow, controlled way, get them used up, but like done so safely that they don't tear apart other cellular infrastructure? Um, it's not simply about working harder, fatty,
Hmm.
as many people on the internet would like to naively claim it is. Um, Obviously, the best solution is to never get there in the first place, but once you're there, it's a much more complicated discussion. And and yeah, like to think about the Ozempic thing for a second. These people are just shedding weight like it's nothing.
Hmm.
Um, because the hormones are messing with insulin, like the whole insulin thing, which is very complicated, is allowing this fat that due to insulin would otherwise be locked up in body fat. It's allowing the linoleic acid that's stuck in your cells to get burned. I can only imagine what that's doing to someone's immune system and detoxification pathways and like overall contributing to inflammation when you're taking years or decades worth of linoleic acid in these tissues and causing them to get lit on fire in a matter of weeks. Like,
Hmm.
what is that doing to their liver? What is that doing to their kidneys? Like, is anyone
Yeah,
asking
yeah.
this
And
question?
I guess we
Yeah.
don't actually know, but what you're saying is it based on what we know about the lipid biology here and the biochemistry, it's plausible that they're basically just undergoing more oxidative stress per unit time than they otherwise would have.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And which the body was trying to protect from. And that's why the body was not letting go of the body fat, which you overrode with the GLP-1 inhibitor or whatever.
Hmm.
And so then, okay, cool, you got rid of the fat, but what else did you do? Your inflammatory systems, your immune system, whatever else. And I mean, looking at the way that various Ozempic patients look, like they're very
Hmm.
gaunt,
The
like they
Ozempic
seem to
face.
age. Yeah, like they seem to age, wrinkles. I've seen that a lot. Um, Maybe there's something going on with that, right?
Hmm.
I just thought of that, by the way. I'm not,
Yeah, no,
it's
I was actually thinking
maybe
about it
made
too.
up,
I was a little
but
unsure of whether to bring it up because we are speculating. We don't know,
yeah.
but people do comment. This does seem to be common. People who do take Ozempic, they get they call it the Ozempic face. There's
Mhm.
their skin is looking like a little different, a little saggy and stuff, and maybe that's just them losing fat mass, but what you're saying is it's possible that that has
Yeah.
something to do with oxidative stress here.
Right. Right. Because you're unleashing all of these oxidation prone molecules all at
Mm-hmm.
once
Yeah.
into a body that does not necessarily have a detoxification system prepared to handle them.
Yeah. And I want to talk. So I want to talk. We talked about what seed oils are and where they came from to some extent. I want to talk about some of the economic and social drivers that
Mm,
propelled them to get to where they are today. So maybe just to set this up, if we go back to the early 20th century, back to the 1800s, why did anyone want to go through all of this trouble to build all the machines, to do all the industrial extractions, to do all the work to make these oils? Why go
right.
through all that trouble and work when we already had things like lard and butter and other oils? What was the driving force there?
Right. So the first commercially produced in large quantity seed oil product was Crisco, made by Procter and Gamble.
Mm-hmm.
And Crisco, of course, is a fat. Um, it's like a solid, like lard looking like thing. Everyone knows this. Um, but what they don't know is that it comes from cottonseed oil. And cotton seeds are interesting because the cotton industry, which was a very big part of the American economy at the time, the cotton industry produces a lot of seeds, a lot of cotton seeds that are waste product. They're useless. And so if you're in industry of any sort, you always want to waste as little as possible, to lose as little money as possible and sell stuff for as much money as possible, right? Reduce expenses, increase revenue. So they have this waste product. The cotton industry doesn't know what to do with this. And at the same time, uh, they're thinking at the same I don't know if there was a shortage of like whale oil or something. But the way they decided to work around this waste of cotton seeds was to see if they could try and turn them into soap. Um,
Mm.
Soap at the time was the first driver, which I learned this from Kate Shanahan's book. I always thought it was Crisco first. Crisco actually came second.
Hmm.
So anyway, they invented the ability to extract cottonseed oil and then also solidify it. And this is called hydrogenation. I mean,
Yeah.
I haven't heard the term hydrogenated vegetable oil for a long time, but when I was a kid,
Mm-hmm.
it was a common thing. I'm sure
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
seem like you're somewhat of a similar age. You remember this. Hydrogenation is the process of turning an unsaturated fat into saturated fat, right? By adding
Mm-hmm.
hydrogens, just like we talked about. Saturated fats have all the hydrogens, so you take a polyunsaturated fat, you add hydrogens, artificially. Now it's saturated. That makes it solid. And so there's a funny thing in like the world culture at the time, which is that people do not use liquid soap, nor do
Hmm.
they use liquid oils. And
Hmm.
so there's like this weird thing going on where now we have hand pump soap, liquid soap is all over the place. Dawn, everyone's familiar with this. But for the longest time, people used ivory bar soap.
Hmm.
Like soap was made from lard and it was solid. It was bar soap. So they needed to make solid soap if they wanted to sell soap. And so they invented the process of extracting the oils, hydrogenating them, and that allowed them to make soap. And of course, we know Procter& Gamble's a household cleaning company. At some point, though, I think someone got the bright idea to also like, hey, we have the solid fat and soap is made from lard. Well, what else do people use lard for? Cooking. So why can't we use this raw ingredient, the hydrogenated seed oils, the hydrogenated cottonseed oils? Why can't we use that raw ingredient to sell as like a lard replacement as well? Which they did, and that was Crisco, which was the first like, vegetable oil, edible vegetable oil product marketed ever.
Hmm.
And I believe that came out in 1924. And at that time, um, or shortly thereafter, Procter and Gamble started donating a lot of money to what was a nascent organization at the time, the American Heart Association, to
Mm.
try and, convince people to eat this stuff because you know
They
how,
had a product, they had a large supply of
yeah.
stuff, and they needed a way to market it and create demand.
Right. So, you know how people are, right? They're
Hmm.
very stuck in their ways. And
Yeah.
so if you try and tell a bunch of like red-blooded farm Americans like living out on in the frontier, hey, stop eating this lard that you've been and your family's been eating for, literally since time immemorial. Stop eating that and instead eat this fake thing. Like that wasn't just going to happen overnight. And
Hmm.
so a big part of their marketing campaign was getting doctors and the medical establishment behind Crisco, which they did with a donation that I believe in today's dollars is something like 20 million bucks to the American Heart Association at the time. Um, and that sort of kicked off this decades long propaganda war to get people to eat vegetable oil derived products. So first it was Crisco, and then
So hold on. The propaganda work. What you mean is, uh, Crisco became marketed, and these polyunsaturated fatty acids became marketed as heart healthy.
right. Well, not yet. They were
Oh, okay.
trying. They were getting there. The heart healthy didn't come up until the 50s. But
Mm,
basically, getting the American Heart Association, doctors, and
hmm
associated people to start normalizing and
hmm
recommending Crisco.
Well, at this time, is that why they were calling it vegetable oil and trying to be like, okay, these are vegetables. Vegetables are good for you. Vegetable oil. Was that the
Um,
idea?
s- so yeah, the liquid oils came out in the 50s. So
Mm,
this is what I'm saying. Like the Americans were eating solid lard,
yeah,
solid
yeah, yeah.
animal-based fat. The first thing to be introduced was a solid vegetable fat.
Yep.
And then some decades later, after that had become pervasive, they started selling and marketing the liquid vegetable fat. And that revolution started happening in the 50s. And that's when
hmm
you have the heart healthy stuff and all the cholesterol stuff, right? Because the anti-cholesterol science and medical campaigning um, happened only after liquid oils became available because saturated fat is high in cholesterol, right? And
hmm
so Crisco, ironically, is not like it's not unsaturated. It's not a PUFA. It's actually not as inflammatory as the liquid vegetable oils that came later. It's artificial nonetheless,
hmm
but it's not this like the low cholesterol, low saturated fat marketing doesn't work on Crisco because it's a highly saturated fat, right? It's solid at room temperature. It must be saturated. Um, so I think we skipped a few generations. This is all it's like a scattered history. Um, but suffice to say, it started with soap. They used it to make bar soap, and
Yep.
then they used it to make solid edible oil. This took off in part because of propaganda with the American Heart Association. It also took off because there was a lot of a very interesting cultural concept here where they were marketing off people's fear of like this taboo of dirtiness.
Mm,
So, I mentioned earlier, like the dirtiness in the farm sense, dust and dirt and, manure and like, wood and this dusty thing. America was rapidly urbanizing and modernizing. And so the bourgeoisie, like the American urban elite, wanted to detach themselves from this sort of farm cultural roots that many of them had
yeah,
even grown
yeah,
up in. And so Crisco can say, hey, buy Crisco. It comes from a
yeah,
lab. It's made
yeah.
by science. This
You're
is
not a
like the
dirty frontiersman, are you?
right. No, you're not
Yeah,
dirty frontiersman. This is the era when like the Wright brothers were
yeah,
flying and
yeah.
like the Hindenburg and like the airships and like the sort
Hmm.
of
So it
steampunky
was a status thing. It was a status thing. They
futurist
made
thing.
it cool.
Yeah, they made it cool for this sort of like modern version of like cleanliness and not
hmm
in like a sort of moral sense, right?
hmm
Um, Also, there was a lot of marketing of Crisco to Jewish housewives because lard is, of course, not kosher,
Mm,
but Crisco is.
mm,
And so Jews had been excluded from using lard for however many centuries. And so now it was like, oh, you can make pie crust just like it is with lard, but it's kosher, and so you can do this. So there's a lot of like housewife, like, oh, it's better.
yeah, yeah.
And there's a lot of this cultural, it's clean, it's modern, it's new. It's like it's much more civilized, if you will.
hmm
And so that was like the sort of Crisco marketing campaign, which subsequently led to the vegetable oil stuff in the 50s. And so by that time, it wasn't simply Procter and Gamble. There were a lot of people who had a lot of spare vegetables, spare grains lying around. This
hmm
has a lot to do with World War II.
hmm
So during World War II, there were the farm subsidies because the government needed to make
hmm
sure that farmers grew enough food to
Yep.
support the
We got
troops.
really
And
good at making a lot of this stuff.
very good at making a lot of food. And this has also to do with the chemical industry, right? Because
hmm
during World War One, World War Two, the chemical industry was employed to make, gunpowder and fertilizer, gunpowder and bombs and tear gas and whatever. But after the war, there's not much use for that much gunpowder and tear gas and bombs and anything else. And so the chemical industry ended up setting their sights on two sub-industries, the pharmaceutical industry and the agriculture industry. And they began making chemicals uh, and just household use in general. They began making chemicals for those applications because war was over.
hmm
Fun fact, DuPont, which is one of the largest chemical conglomerates in the world today, they invented nylon among other fabrics. I'm pretty sure they invented polyester. DuPont started out in the 1800s as a gunpowder company
Hmm.
by this French immigrant to America, someone, DuPont or whatever. They were a military company, but in peacetime they repurpose all their tooling to make stuff that's, not of military application. So all this like gunpowder, tear gas, bomb engineers set their sights on fertilizer. And during and especially after World War II in the 50s, this green revolution happened where they basically invented like modern fertilizer. We had an abundance of all these crops. The subsidies that were in place during World War II were still in full swing, and they still are today. They've never been removed because the Midwestern voters or the Midwestern politicians don't want to take away, the handouts from their constituents. And so you have this confluence of things where we basically have a ton of cheap corn available in the US. Pesticided, fertilized, and available in abundance, subsidized by the government. And so people started to think about what to do with this corn. And that's literally been a problem for decades, right? At this time, the answer was, oh, we'll make seed oils out of corn oil. A few decades later, someone invented high fructose corn syrup. But that's another thing to do with the extra corn. And more recently, probably when you were a kid, you remember that like green ethanol fuel, like the Chevys were being advertised for.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
like corn-derived ethanol being put in the gasoline, which is actually horrible for cars, and it doesn't actually help them at all. It doesn't make them more fuel efficient or better for the environment or anything. It's just they have so much damn freaking corn in
yeah.
the
It's just
Midwest.
another example of how the surplus drives this need to create demand.
Yeah, they have to put it everywhere, and then they have to run ads saying like, "Oh, ethanol in your gas is good." And it's like I ran through as a kid. I used to mow lawns, and we ran through um, several weed whackers that would last like half a season before realizing that you had to put some weird stabilizer chemical in the gasoline because the gas had gotten corn in it all of a sudden. Um, and it would kill most conventional engines unless you put some, I forget what it's
Mhm,
called, some
mhm.
chemical in it. Um, anyway, yeah, so long history of this
Yeah,
stuff. But I think
yeah. Surplus leading to artificial demand. It's a common motif in
yeah, like you
history.
create the market. Fluoride, right?
Yeah.
Another one. Flax seeds. That's another
Mhm.
conspiracy theory I have about this. I don't know if you want to get into that one.
I
Uh,
don't know. I don't even know what you're referring to.
yeah, so basically, flaxseed oil was used before petroleum for a lot of plastic-like substances.
Mm.
Oil-based paint, like Michelangelo or whoever, Da Vinci painting the Mona Lisa. Oil-based paint was made of flaxseed oil. The industrial name for flaxseed oil is linseed oil, so there's a lot of confusion here. But flaxseed
Mm.
oil and linseed oil are the same thing, same plant, same seed, same oil. Um, so oil-based paint was made with flaxseed oil, various lacquers for finishing wood, linoleum, that lin word again, Lin. Linoleum, which is like this plasticky floor treatment that was invented in the early 1900s, made of flaxseed oil. And also the flax fibers make linen, like the shirt I'm wearing,
Hmm.
linen, one of the
Hmm.
oldest fabrics and one of the oldest cultivated plants in Western civilization, actually. Anyway, petroleum, the widespread availability of petroleum and the chemical and the technological advances that resulted did two things: plastics and artificial fabrics. So all the uses for linseed oil are replaced by petroleum derivatives. Oil-based paint is no longer made of flaxseed oil, right? Paint thinners and all of that stuff, it's all petroleum derived. You have plastic flooring, vinyl flooring. It's plastic from petroleum, not linoleum. You can buy linoleum. It's not made of flaxseed oil anymore. Um, and then also the fabrics, instead of linen shirts, people have polyester shirts and nylon shirts made of petroleum. And so my theory is that because of these major hits to the traditional industry of the flax plant, the oil and the like acrylic paint, right? Plastic, the oil and the fabric no longer being relevant or as interesting to consumers because we have polyester fabric and all these petroleum oil replacements. They had to figure out something to do with the flax industry because it's like a large part of Europe's economy and in Canada and elsewhere is like, flax. They've been growing it for 10,000 years. Well, not in Canada, but you get my point. Anyway, flax seeds became a health food for the first time in the 90s. And that's the first time anyone in human history ever ate flax seeds. Like, go back, the Bible talks about the flax plant. They don't eat flax seeds. Like, it was never food for human consumption. It was never viewed as food up until the 90s when, like, some people, I think, misappropriated the flax plant and they had the surplus that they had to go sell due to the
Hmm.
fact that they weren't selling it because of petroleum anymore.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, this happens a lot.
Wow.
Oh, algae. Oh crap. I don't want to keep doing this, but this is another one.
Yeah. So like
Diet
algae,
algae.
algae oil.
Algae
That's got
oil.
omega threes, right?
Yeah. The modern like algae, not just the algae oil like the cooking oil. It's like the modern sea moss gel. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's algae. So in Florida, and elsewhere, there's this thing called red tide, which is um, when like the runoff from the pesticides from the sugar plantations in Florida get into the ocean and they create this like algae bloom because
Hmm.
like it disrupts the chemistry of the ocean. It's like disgusting. It's like it smells bad. There's bugs, there's fleas. It's like the ocean, it kills the fish, whatever. Anyway, the sea moss people are like trying to market to you sea moss. It's just algae, and they like to claim that it's like, oh, this pristine thing off the coast of Ireland. No, they're literally putting like algae blooms from like pesticide runoff in supplements and calling it a superfood. Um,
That's
yeah,
where it comes from.
anyway, I'm sure there are more examples, but this is a very common motif. Glad you pointed that out.
Um, okay, so if we go back to some of the biology here, so we were talking about omega 6s, omega 3s, why they're sort of supposed to be in balance from an evolutionary perspective, but also why ancestrally humans weren't consuming a lot. We talked about right the sort of the balancing act the immune system has to do to regulate inflammation properly. You want it when you need it, but you don't want it beyond that.
Hmm.
We talked about why reactive oxygen species can lead to oxidative stress and all of that stuff. All of that fits. You can think about it in evolutionary terms. It makes biological sense. There's a lot of mechanistic detail there around the biology that's known, and it all makes sense. But if I'm going to play devil's advocate for a moment,
Right.
and many people will make this argument, they'll say, okay, all of that makes sense in theory. All of those pieces seem to fit together nicely into a hypothesis that seems plausible. But if everything you're saying is true about seed oil, Stephen, shouldn't we see more randomized control trials where you give seed oils to people and inflammatory markers go up, or you take them away and inflammatory markers go down?
Right. Good question. So there's 2 points. There's two answers I have. One is that we do. They looked into this. So before seed oils were invented, no one ate them. There was never any study on this. It was brand new. No one had seen this exist. So it was a very open question. And so part of the research funded by Procter and Gamble into the American Heart Association and the whole diet heart hypothesis, the cholesterol scandals, the saturated fat, all of this was funded by the industry desiring to sell a non-traditional food to people that was low in saturated fat, high in polyunsaturated fats.
Mm-hmm.
Ansel Keys is the sort of anti-hero of this little episode in American history. And he's like this researcher that was instrumental in promoting the polyunsaturated fats are good message. They did numerous randomized control trials um, to examine the differences between a saturated fat diet and a polyunsaturated fat diet. One of them, I believe, is called the Minnesota Prison Experiment. They did experiments on prisoners. They also did experiments in mental hospitals. I think they did experiments in nursing homes, whatever. Um, the crazy thing about this, and Kate Shanahan talks about this exact topic in the book mentioned above, which again I highly recommend. They didn't publish all of their data. They were not forthcoming with the actual conclusions of the studies. There were several of these that showed that all-cause mortality in the seed oil group was higher than in the control group that ate saturated fats. But those conclusions never made it into the final studies. And as again, Dr. Shanahan talks about in the book, they were not even people did not even know this until some investigative scientists like found his archives in I forget some hospital somewhere and started researching into the actual data they had and
Mm-hmm.
began publishing the data. The original studies did not include the data. What they did include though was like the few conclusions they could spin to make it appear as if the seed oil groups were healthier. And so, of course, they measured cholesterol, which a seed oil diet does
Lower
reduce
cholesterol.
cholesterol.
Yeah.
We know that. And so, once they had, through crook and by hook and by crook, established the idea that low cholesterol is good, and everyone kind of ran with this. Further studies didn't have to say that the seed oil diet was healthy. They just had to say that the seed oil
Lowers
diet lowered
cholesterol.
cholesterol, which is obviously like, I don't know what you call this, like a proxy outcome. I think that's like the term for this, where
Mm-hmm.
you're not actually saying, oh, this thing results in health. You're just saying this thing results in this other thing, and this other thing results in health. So, it results in health by
Yeah.
the
It
transitive
results in the
property.
thing that
Yeah.
everyone now believes already automatically necessarily means better health.
Yeah, it's like the transitive property of
Yeah.
quality or whatever, basically.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, A means B, B means C, so A means C, right? So yeah, they were able to publish studies, which they did, saying that the
Mm-hmm.
seed
Mm-hmm.
oil control groups had lower cholesterol, and then that was enough conclusion for them. The data, of course, showing that not about cholesterol, but about all-cause mortality, which is the actual important thing. People died more so from eating seed oils than they did from eating saturated fats. That data never saw the light of day. And by the time that researchers found it and started looking into it, the entire American nutrition industrial complex and the entire thing had already been set in stone for the most part. And it's the
Mhm.
exact same thing that like we're fighting today. And we know this. People have literally dug up the original studies, looked at the data, realized that we were being lied to. But the cultural power of the vegetable oil, heart healthy, blah blah blah, is so strong that it's going it has taken will take a lot of work to either spread the message, convince people, whatever. Um, so that answers your first question. They did do studies, or that's the first answer to your question. They did do RCTs and they did actually prove that seed oils were not good for you, but the conclusions were never reported. It was just in the data that was looked at after. The other thing, of course, to think about modern discourse, right? Why are there no new studies? Why are there no new RCTs? Like if you go look at the seed oil sources, nowadays, recent research, all you find is like mice studies and like all sorts of things
Mhm.
that are not so overwhelmingly obviously conclusive as the devil's advocates would maybe like. The reason for this, of course, is the classic who funds the science.
Mhm.
You know, um, for every study that I pull out of my ass that I can find, you can, if you're arguing with me, you can find a corresponding study that says the exact opposite thing. That's how science works. Everyone is familiar, I think, at this point with the replicability crisis,
Yeah,
by that Stanford professor. What is his paper where he's like, all of
that
the
was Mark. You're probably talking about the Alzheimer's researcher.
I'm talking about the
Mark.
guy at Stanford who published a paper that said most papers are bullshit.
Oh, you're talking about John. Yeah, John Ioannidis.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Um, so papers are bullshit. The research is not replicable.
yeah.
Um,
Much of it is, and it's hard. It's hard to tell even to the trained eye what is and what isn't. Oftentimes.
right. And so that's why, like, okay, right, there are no studies
Yeah,
because the Tallow Institute or the Saturated Fat Institute is not funding saturated fat good studies, right?
yeah, yeah.
I could do that, right? Give me enough money and I could fund you some studies that says
Yeah.
saturated fat's good.
And yeah, I mean, this really is an important point because I just wrote an article and I've talked about this on the podcast before, just to give one example to crystallize what you're saying. A study recently came out, and every all the science journalists were talking about it. We shared all over social media, and the headline result was, if you eat more plant fats and less animal fats, lower cardiovascular disease. That was basically the headline result. But all of it was built on a food frequency questionnaire and the assumption that people's diets were stable for decades, even though they didn't check. And I basically just explained for people, look, the input data to this is total garbage, but this type of thing gets published all of the time. And therefore, there's a whole library of nonsense studies that you can point to and say, look, studies by scientists. And
Yeah.
you could basically just cherry pick any number of them that you want to make the case for anything that you want.
Right. Any science debate more or less comes down to like my made up cherry pick studies are better than your made up cherry pick
Right, right.
studies. And it's like an epistemological question, of course.
Mm-hmm,
Like, how useful is this at this point? Um, and obviously, like if you look at first principles, the scientific method seems like a perfectly like useful, valid thing. Um, However, the way that it's implemented by people with all sorts of incentives in academia and in industry and in government and whatever else, the way that it actually gets implemented is not enable the finding of truth, the systematic finding of truth. It certainly is not.
mm-hmm,
Certainly in areas that are more subjective, say like biology.
mm-hmm.
Physics studies, as far as I can tell, are harder to fudge. Like math, you can't really fake a math proof. It's
Yeah,
very
yeah,
obvious.
yeah.
It's true or it's not true. But the further away from math basically you get in the scientific world, the easier it is to fudge. And by the
Right. The
time
more
you're in
corruptible the
biology,
whole
it's like all
enterprise
bets are
is.
off.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, that's my rebuttal to the supposed devil's advocate. I guess
Yeah.
give me 10 million bucks and I'll get you your studies.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, and
Like,
I think it is a legitimate answer. It's like a lot of times, um, so on the one hand, you get a lot of studies that are done where they effectively amount to the launder. Someone funds studies such that a preconceived conclusion can be laundered through the publication process to create quote unquote evidence for it,
mhm.
even though the study is problematic in many, many ways. And then the flip side is there's many great questions where clear experiments could be done, but they're simply not done because someone needs to pay for these very expensive clinical trials.
And the people, of course, with the people with the incentive to have that study done are not the people with the money to have that
Right,
study done.
right.
Yeah. Um, I'm sure all the people on Twitter would be very happy to have some good RCTs done for seed oils, but unless we crowdfund some research, it's not going to work. And even then, there's the whole issue of social prestige, right? Like, yeah, you could probably find some backwater lab at some backwater school to go do your study, but then someone's going to say, "Oh, but Harvard studies say this, and you're
Yeah,
some
yeah.
dumb school, so it doesn't matter what you say." So you really need to be able to like capture the prestige of
Right,
the
right.
institutions which have it, which is then even more money. So, got to go back to the Twitter crowdfunding and be like, "Oh, sorry, we actually need to do this
We
study
need
at
more.
Columbia, so we need more money." Yeah, but I mean, again, that's kind of that
Yeah.
tells you all you need to know. The fact that you can just pay for science to be done is it's kind of like oh, that's interesting. Um, it's kind of like indulgences in the medieval Catholic Church,
Mm.
right? I'll do this bad thing, but if I pay you money, you'll find some way to say it's okay. Studies, same thing. Oh, I'll sell you poison, but if I pay you enough money to the priests of academia, they'll find a way to say that what I'm doing is okay.
Mhm.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, the way that, one of the aspects of sort of the sociology of science that I've tried to explain to people before is I don't necessarily like this could be true. I'm not going to rule it out completely, but like I don't believe that someone like say the American Heart Association is like getting into, backroom meetings with scientists and saying, "Here's your conclusion, make it look this way." But what they do is they fund a bunch of labs and then those labs produce whatever results they happen to produce. And then they could just selectively say, okay, who do we want to refund again next season?
Yeah.
They're going to bias towards the ones that produce the results that are favorable to them and away from the other ones. And
And
then
the scientists will
this
get the hint. Yeah.
this iteration of who gets
Yeah.
funded and refunded is what creates this drift that
Yeah.
points in the wrong direction.
Well, there's another step to this too, which I guess accelerates this sort of devolutionary process. Again, Dr. Shanahan talks about this in the book, is that the American Heart Association, in addition to funding studies, also runs several prestigious journals. And
Mm,
so they just won't accept certain
right,
papers
right.
into their journals if they question whatever or they don't talk about what they want them to talk about. So yeah, they may end up funding a study accidentally to some lab who didn't get the picture. But even if that study gets done and the results are not helpful to whoever, or convenient for whoever, it just won't get published. And
Yeah,
so, or at least it won't get published in a prestigious
yeah.
journal, which is basically the same as not getting
Right.
published in
They restrict
academia.
the types of the number of journals it could potentially get into easily. And also the flip side of that is, as someone who has published many scientific papers, I've gone through the submission process many times. The flip side of that is, you can make it very easy for certain types of results to get published quickly.
Mhm.
And I'm sure that happen that definitely does happen to some
Yeah, I
extent.
mean they own the paper, they own the
Yeah.
journals, and they supply the funding. So obviously
Yeah.
they can make that happen pretty quickly.
Um, Another thing I want to get to, because we got maybe 30, 40 minutes left here. Another area that's a little bit controversial that I think you have a take on, and I see people talk about this. It's interesting. Some people think it's absurd. I started thinking about this in some conversations I had on the podcast with people who knew about photobiology and the
Mm,
effects of different wavelengths of light on mitochondrial biology and skin biology and things like this. I started thinking more about sunscreen and sunburn. I'm
sure.
fair skinned. I've had to think about that all my life. And I learned some interesting stuff. And I'm going to skip the details that sort of got me down this rabbit hole. But I think you have a position on the relationship between seed oil consumption and diet more generally, and the propensity one has for sunburn. And I'm wondering if you could start to talk about that a little bit.
Right. All right, so it gets back to the fundamental issue with unsaturated fats, which is that they're prone to oxidation.
Mhm.
And um, again, high energy, heat, light, etc., oxygen causes the breakdown of polyunsaturated fats. Polyunsaturated fats. That's not controversial. Anyone who's ever like learned chemistry knows this and will not argue this point.
Mhm.
And so the point about when you eat stuff, especially when 20% of your calories are this thing, they go in your body, right? Your body, your body gets built off of this stuff.
Yep.
And so two of the prime places that polyunsaturated fats go is your body fat and also cell membranes. And so um, your cell membranes are supposed to be a certain amount of polyunsaturated fat because they have to be somewhat flexible. Like this is known. That's natural. 5,000 years ago, even before seed oils, people still had polyunsaturated fats in their cell membranes. Fine. Uh, do they have it in their adipose tissue? No. Um, were they floating around in their blood? No. Were they just like hanging out? No. And so if you have this thing that's being exposed to this, oxygen and intense light, and it's prone to oxidation, it will oxidize and cause inflammation. And inflammation, of course, like in this context, is red skin, it hurts, sunburn. Um, there actually are several studies that I'm happy to send you. Again, studies, are they useful or not? Which I think are funny because they sort of inadvertently, like that's the fun thing about all the seed oil stuff is like you have to find a lot of this as like inadvertent conclusions to things that are studying something else. Because like scientists are not going to come out and like look at do seed oils cause sunburn, but they will say, here, I'll try to give you an example. They will say that like photocarcinogenesis or carcinogenesis and photoimmunosuppression increases with dietary polyunsaturated fat consumption. They'll say that, but they won't say seed oils cause sunburn. They've done this several times where they get a bunch of mice and they feed them different amounts of polyunsaturated fat diets and blast them with UV light. And the ones that eat more PUFA have more skin cancer. Um, they also talk about UV-induced oxidative stress, aka sunburn, on mice. And the fatter the mice are, the more they get this. And of course, the mice are eating a high PUFA diet, and so their body fat is full of PUFA. Um, I think the basic idea is that uh, seed oils cause the breakdown of seed oils cause inflammation, and wherever that happens to be causes inflammatory symptoms, native to that organ. In the skin, that's like sunburn, and eventually you get skin cancer. In the brain, you get Alzheimer's, and so seed oils are like a prime cause of Alzheimer's. There's a Japanese scientist who's, it sounds like I think you're familiar with this guy, who's done a lot of work to show that. In the liver, people often get fatty liver disease. Like people are seeing fatty liver disease in babies and children. People who are not even alcoholics. And previously, fatty liver disease was exclusively the realm of late stage alcoholics. Um, you get seed oils in your eyeballs and you get glaucoma, sorry, macular degeneration. There's a talk by Chris Kenobi where he goes into this in depth.
Mhm,
He's like
mhm.
a eye
But
researcher.
going back to the skin thing, is the
Yeah.
claim here just explicitly lay out the claim here because I think some people create a boogeyman because I've seen this quite a bit. Some people will say, well, these seed oil people are saying that you'll never get sunburn. You can go in the sun all day long if you don't eat seed oil.
Oh, sure, sure, sure.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So, yeah, if you go in the sun for a long enough amount of time, anyone will get sunburn under the right circumstances. That's
Hmm.
not, maybe some people have the claim, but that's not the actual claim. The claim is that your skin's resilience to sunlight is diminished in the presence of seed oils.
Hmm.
That's kind of it, right? Eventually, I'm not, and it's also like time and place dependent, right? If you've been inside all winter and you have not built up a sun callus, and you take a spring break trip to
Right,
Florida,
right.
it's mid-March, and you just like sit on the beach for 8 hours a day, you're gonna get sunburned. I'll get sunburned anyway. I haven't eaten seed oils in however many years. I'll get sunburned. Anyone will get sunburned. Um, if I go to Costa Rica and it's like UV 12,
Yeah.
and it's midday, like I'll probably get sunburned because it's just very freaking hot.
Hmm.
What will happen though is that I won't end up peeling as much as the, normal typical person. Um, if at all, and my skin will go back to normal the next day and whatnot. The claim specifically is simply that seed oils weaken your body's ability to handle sunlight because your skin gets inflamed more quickly when the seed oils, when the polyunsaturated fats are there, getting oxidized than your skin would if the polyunsaturated fats were not there.
Hmm.
That's the claim.
Hmm.
Is that helpful?
Yeah, yeah. No,
Okay.
I just wanted you to lay that out for people.
Yeah.
I mean, for what it's worth, I mean, basically, the strategy that I now take that I didn't take for much of my life with the sun is, I by default I don't use sunscreen.
Mhm.
I use sensory feedback to intermittently go in and out of shade.
Yeah.
And I can tell you for the last couple summers, as someone who's fair skinned who burns quite easily historically, I haven't had to deal with anything in the last couple of years.
Yeah.
I have used sunscreen if I know that I'm on a boat all day long and I can't
Sure.
avoid the sun or something like that. But I used to just expect to get sunburned some
Yeah.
amount of each summer by default, and I haven't had any issues lately.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, I personally bias toward shade, either external or clothing derived shade as the primary mechanism of like, protecting from too much sun
Mhm.
exposure, which is definitely a thing, right? You won't become invincible to the sun.
Yeah.
It's just, I think the right metaphor here is a space shuttle on reentry. It has heat pads. What are they called? Whatever they're called. Crap, what do they call it? Like ceramic tiles that are, very insulative and prevent the thing from blowing up. What are those called? Heat shields? No.
I'm not sure.
Anyway, similar, imagine a similar spaceship or space shuttle, but instead of having the full sheet of tiles, like half of them are broken off,
Yeah.
right? And then the friction causes the heat to get in there and the thing explodes. That's really what we're talking about. The shuttle will still get hot, it'll
Hmm.
still come in. It's not like
It's not
immune,
immune to heat. Yeah.
right? However, it's just better protected because
Hmm.
its body is able to handle it. I mean, it's very interesting. The rate of skin cancer by U.S. state, if the sun were so damaging, you'd expect that, Texas, Florida, Arizona, New Mexico, all of those states would have the worst rates of skin cancer. And then Maine and whatever would have basically nothing. But that's not it at all. Um, Florida is one of the lower skin cancer states in the entire country. And like the entire state is all about spending as much time as possible. Like Florida man is like tan and leathery and whatever. Maine has a very high incidence of skin cancer, and so does Seattle, and
Mm.
so does Washington State, which is
Yeah.
very interesting. So the sun exposure is not clearly, if there's no correlation, it certainly can't be a causative factor, right? People always say, like the Reddit tier debunkers, if you will, I was like, oh, correlation doesn't imply causation, and obviously they're correct. But the contrapositive of this is that causation requires correlation.
Right. The lack of correlation does
Yeah.
tell you something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so if there's no pattern here, then like obviously sun exposure is not causing skin cancer. There's that guy somewhat famous. I don't follow him, but I just heard about it. Like Twitch streamer. He's like a video game dude and he has foot cancer.
Hmm.
And I'm like, here's a guy in his like mid 20s who spends his entire day inside in the dark, probably at 3 in the
You mean
morning with
foot,
his
like skin cancer of the foot?
yeah, skin cancer in the foot, under his desk where there's like no light ever, wearing
Yeah.
socks,
Yeah. Yeah.
and he has skin cancer in the foot. Clearly, the sun is not doing that. Something else is doing this.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, I think there's another interesting thing with the sun and seed oils too, which is
Yeah.
funny. Vitamin D, right? So
Mm.
vitamin D is it's actually the purposeful oxidation of cholesterol, certain cholesterol molecule called 7-dehydroxycholesterol, if I'm not mistaken. Um, that molecule gets exposed to like a UV light photon, and that molecule then turns into vitamin D. And so, if you want to make vitamin D, you need to have a supply of cholesterol in your skin. And so, an um, interesting thing about seed oils is that they largely replace high cholesterol foods in our diet, such as tallow and lard and butter and whatever. And so the low cholesterol people, as you mentioned, seed oils successfully lower cholesterol. The low cholesterol people have a deficiency of cholesterol, which in their body, which of course implies in their skin, because the skin is a subset of the
Hmm.
body. And so they're less able to produce vitamin D
Yeah. The
in
substrate
the
for vitamin
sunlight.
D production is lower.
Yeah, but not only does that mean they can't produce as much vitamin D, it means that they don't have the, shock absorbing cholesterol that absorbs the UV light and turns it into something constructive. They don't
Mm.
have that at all. So UV light's just hitting their skin and damaging who knows what. Um, and so there's a sort of that's like the sort of secondary factor, but there's a kind of like twofold layer here that the presence of seed oils causes increased oxidative stress and inflammation of the skin, leading to sunburn. Um, and the fact that the seed oils are replacing otherwise high cholesterol foods
Mhm.
limits cholesterol, which would also help absorb UV light
Yeah.
constructively.
Yeah. A couple other things I want to get to in the time we have left. I want to talk a
Sure.
little bit about what you're doing in your company and stuff. But before we get there, let's just say that you've got someone who is losing weight or trying to lose weight or interested in losing weight. So they're overweight to some extent. They want to get rid of some of that body fat. Let's say this person sort of buys your general perspective on this stuff that they should be
Yeah.
reducing their seed oil consumption, et cetera. What should people expect there in terms of the timing of how long stuff is going to take
Mhm.
and how long this I want to talk about how long these fatty acids can stay in our bodies. If someone stops seed oil consumption tomorrow,
Yeah.
what can they expect in terms of their body fat and what it's doing?
Yeah. See, this is a good question. This is one of the first studies that I would fund if I ever had the opportunity to fund a study that could do such a thing. Is what is the true half-life of seed oils in the body under real world conditions?
Mm-hmm.
We don't actually know. The best figures I've seen and the one that all the seed oil influencers toss around is that the half-life is 2 years. And there's one study that I have linked. I have a whole like seed oil study file on my Substack. I have this linked somewhere, and it says 2 years is the half-life. But of course, this was a random byproduct of a study investigating something else entirely. Um, there's been no, to my knowledge, like clinical trial or whatever where people were, given a protocol for detoxifying from seed oils and this half-life was actually measured. I would
Mhm.
love to get a whole bunch of people in a room, or not a room, but you get the point. Give these people like this diet, those people that diet, this supplement, that supplement, sauna this, workout that, and see like who detoxifies from seed oils the quickest. We don't know. However, it is like a half year, a 2 year half life. I'm sure under constructive effort, that number is a lot lower. And by constructive effort, I mean replacing seed oils and the fat in your body with like actual, saturated fat from
Mhm.
actual food. Um, and implementing some manner of things that might hope to help detoxify you, namely vitamin E and other antioxidants, vitamin C, doing a lot of saunaing, sweating, whatever. Um, that is my pieced together protocol. It's not very formal. I've never tested it. I don't want anyone to think that I've actually like run a study doing this. No one has the money to. I will hopefully one day, and then we can run it. But that's what I would say is you need to have like a mechanism for an antioxidant mechanism
To
for
buffer against the
buffer
burning
against.
of, yeah.
Yes, exactly. And you need to give your body a reason to break the seed oils, to start breaking down body fat. And you do that, of course, by eliminating seed oils from your diet, eating 3 square meals a day, stop snacking, whatever. Um, but that's very basic. Weight gain and weight loss is, I think, incredibly complicated. And obviously no one's cracked it, right? If they did, we would know about it. Um, there are a number of factors in addition to simply seed oils that create problems. Hormones being one of them, or probably the largest. Both sex hormones, like estrogen, is of course, obesogenic, and testosterone is not. But then also stress. So not only sex hormones, stress hormones. Um, Testosterone, in my experience, at least for me personally, and for a lot of people that I know, testosterone seems to be most largely affected, honestly, by not what you eat or anything else, but simply like psychological stress. Um, you
Mhm.
go and you're working 10-hour days in front of a laptop,
Yeah.
commuting to the city, whatever, you're stressed out, you get pudgy,
Yeah.
you get
Social
puffy.
defeat.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're experiencing continual psychological defeat. Your T is going to be low. Um, and at the same time, you could be like some surfer bro who like is basically half unemployed, living in San Diego in a shack somewhere, out in the sun all day, not a care in the world, and like your T is going to be through the roof because the way that you're living your life is just very low stress in that particular environment. Um, so there's a lot of interesting research about the relationship between stress hormones and like hormones and other things. Um, but I think in addition to cutting out the seed oils, uh, obviously doing some amount of exercise, but not killing yourself, like that's definitely not the way to go because you're, trying to force your body to dump toxic seed oils. Antioxidants, saunas, the most important thing is figuring out how to reduce your psychological stress. Sunlight is a big help, of course. Sunlight is very relaxing, in an emotional but also physiological way. But also, like, what are you doing at work? Who's your boss? Like, how's your wife or boyfriend or whatever husband
Mhm.
treating you? How are your kids treating you?
Yeah. All
Are
of those
you are
psychosocial factors
all of it?
change you endocrinologically.
Right. And
Yeah.
they do. And
Yeah.
so and then people get into like people get very autistic about this and they're like, "Oh, I need my biohacking tracker this and my protocol that
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
whatever." And meanwhile, like the 85-year-old like Greek dude on some island somewhere, like smoking his 10th cigarette of the day on his fourth coffee is like way healthier than you are as like a 35-year-old like male who's a biohacker.
Mhm.
There's a lot of like people stress themselves out with
Yeah.
their own, and then maybe
I,
this can transition to
I agree. I think this is important. Like, I'm not
yeah,
saying you shouldn't be diligent about your scheduling of things and your ingesting of things and your workout routine, but like some people get neurotic, and I
yeah,
would distinguish between like diligent and neurotic. Where neurotic is, you're neurotic at the point where you're now causing yourself stress that's
yeah.
actually more harmful than any benefit you're getting.
Yeah. And the problem with this is that like there's a good reason to be neurotic. Like everything you consume is poison. And
Mhm.
so, I mean, there's probably 100 things in my house from clothing to furniture to like food and supplements that the average person has no idea about, it's never heard about, or like, wouldn't know that their normal version of that thing is poisoning them. Um, that's insane. Like the fact that I have to do this is obviously a neurotic thing. And I don't think we ever solve this problem, to get back to the question of obesity and whatnot, without not only getting rid of seed oils, but doing a whole host of things that enable people to not be neurotic about
Right,
life in
right,
general and their
right.
health in particular. And that's kind of the whole point. That's the founding philosophy behind my company, which is, make snack foods, the delicious junk foods that everyone loves, that Americans have, been eating for decades. Make those in a way that no one has to worry about what's in them. That's very important. So like the skinny people in the 1950s who were healthy, right? They didn't go to Weight Watchers. They
Right.
didn't take Ozempic. They
Yep.
didn't go do CrossFit 5 times a week. They didn't wear an Oura ring. They didn't do cold plunges.
Yeah. They didn't even have like they never said it themselves. I'm going on a diet.
No, diet,
Yeah.
what's that? They didn't buy organic food, right?
Yeah.
Because there wasn't organic food. There was
Yeah.
like one eggs at the store, one type of eggs. They just bought eggs.
Yeah.
Milk, what do you mean? It's whatever the milkman drops off on the
Yeah.
front
Yeah.
porch. They were like chain smoking alcoholics, and they were a million times healthier than you and me. I'm sure you're very healthy, but even still, like,
Yeah. Than the average American today. Sure.
yeah, sure. Um, they 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 kicked ass. And why? Like they didn't have to think about anything. They went to the diner and ate the food. Like, did they ask for ingredients? There were
Yeah.
no the nutrition labels did not
Yeah.
exist on food at this time. Literally, the nutrition panel
Yeah. So
ingredients
yeah,
list wasn't there.
basically what you're saying is right, the environment was different in two ways simultaneously. One, it wasn't filled with as many poisons as we've since created and
Yeah.
put into the environment. But two, because of that, they didn't have to go to no one had to stress out about all this
No, no one
stuff.
had to think about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so that not only gave them the things they needed to actually be healthy, it did so without the dose of neuroticism that accompanies all those things today.
Right,
So, right,
right,
you
right.
can be healthy today, but you can be healthy neurotic. You can't be healthy and non-neurotic today,
Yeah.
which is like kind of a contradiction because neurosis or neuroses is not healthy, which kind of implies that you can't be healthy at all today. And the only way that you can actually be healthy is when we systematically remove all the bad crap from everywhere, such that there's nothing poisoning anyone and no one has to think about it. And that's the whole point of what I'm trying to do in life. So,
So so again, what are you guys called and what are just give us a sense for all the things that you guys make.
so as of right now, we make our first product 2 years ago, tortilla chips, made with organic nixtamalized corn, grass tallow, and salt. Flavors are just, of course, natural seasonings. Our goal is to basically make Doritos that are, real food Doritos. Um, and the second thing that we launched recently is Vandy Crisps. This is a potato chip, similar thing, organic potatoes, grown in Idaho, fried in grass-fed beef tallow, natural seasonings, same thing. It's like Lay's, but not poison, or kettle chips, but not poison. And the important thing about this, the reason why it matters is that there's plenty of like health products, right? Um, but the health products, it's like there's this dialectic, right? Everything was poison, everything sucked. So we went the entire opposite way. We're gonna do nothing like what they did. If they used corn, we're gonna use cassava. If they used sugar, we're gonna use aspartame or stevia or something. Um, if they used like eggs, we're gonna use carrageenan for like a filler. It's a complete opposite pendulum swing. And that's not good either because these foods and the modern health food ingredient list is full of a bunch of shit that like your grandparents never even heard of, let alone ate.
Yeah, the body doesn't have an evolutionary history with, and therefore it's unlikely we're going to be sort of optimally adapted to them.
Exactly. Like the cassava and the chia and the kale. Well, maybe kale's well, yeah, sure, kale. The stevia. Like, I'm sorry, none of your ancestors ate that. Avocado oil. Like, even Mexicans didn't eat avocado oil in the 1990s. Like, no one ate avocado oil, you know? Um, my grandparents probably never encountered coconut oil in their entire life. Um, so yeah, we have this complete opposite thing. And the problem with this side of the pendulum is that it's, first of all, it pretends to be healthy, but it's not. But more importantly, it doesn't taste good. And so there's a lot of masochists in the health space. Most people probably listening to this have some amount of masochism where they're willing to undergo pain for some higher, purpose or whatever. Maybe they like the fact that like their life gives them a struggle to go accomplish, which is great. Most people are not masochists. Masochists, 95% of people are just eating Doritos and drinking Mountain Dew and they don't think about it, which is like insane for me and for you to conceive of, but they do. Um, those people are never touching the health foods because they taste like shit and they're hedonists. And so why would they do
Mhm.
that? So they're going to stick over here with the foods that were, poisoned and full of seed oils and pesticides and preservatives and whatever. They taste good, but they suck. So this is where we are, right? The dialectic where we have to return to, the synthesis is actually the original starting point, which is the foods, the recipes that we like. The potato chips, crunchy potatoes are delicious. Everyone knows that. Corn chips, whatever. The recipes that we like, but just made without all the crap that made the junk foods junky in the first place. So if you made McDonald's French fries were perfectly fine, 40 years ago, and they were made with beef tallow and like potatoes. Um, Great, cool.
Mhm.
So, the modern McDonald's French fries, the junk food made of poison, and of course, there's, I'm sure, the antithesis to this, which is like a sweet potato freaking straws or something. No one likes sweet potato. Well, sweet potato fries are all right, but they're never as good as real French fries. The attempt to make it healthy. And the real return is the actual thing made the
Mhm.
actual way without all the fake
Yeah.
stuff. And that's why the stuff that we make tastes good as a health food, which is unusual, but also is actually healthy. That's it.
So
That's it.
yeah, I mean, the next thing I want to ask you is, the same large scale industrial processes that make the food bad from a health standpoint that people are consuming is also what makes it cheap and very affordable. How do you guys make your food in a way? How much how much do your snacks cost for people? Are they more expensive? How do you actually make these products in a way that is going to be affordable for people, but also sustains you as a business?
Well, yeah, there you go. They're not cheap. That's how
Mm.
that's how you solve the problem, right? It's like have your cake and eat it too, except it costs more. That's kind of the thing. It's like the classic trilemma, like here are these three things, pick two, because all
Yep,
three
yep,
are impossible. Um, Taste good, healthy, cheap, pick two, right?
yep, yep.
Um, so however, I do have a more constructive answer to this point, or to this question. One of the things that I often say, which is I think important and goes underappreciated, is that everyone's always saying how great things are because everything's cheap nowadays. Well, not everyone's saying that's great, but everything's cheap. The boomer economists are like, "Oh, life's amazing. We can get stuff for so much cheaper than we could back in the day." Whatever. Um, they're right that it's cheap. But stuff isn't cheaper nowadays because of modernity, some magic thing that made everything cheap. Stuff is just worse, right? There's a
Mm.
funny thing on Twitter the other day that was like some meme of saying the furniture that like my grandparents left me, and it's like this ornately carved wooden dresser. I don't know if you saw this meme.
I did not see this one, but I can
Yeah,
imagine where you're going.
yeah. And then it was a picture next to it that said the furniture I'm going to leave my kid, and it was like this white or my grandkids, and it's like this white IKEA plastic box. It was
Yeah,
like
yeah.
just trash thing, and obviously like it's apparent that the white IKEA box is cheaper than the ornately carved wooden, handmade masterpiece of a dresser. However, it's not just cheap, it's also worse. This is
Right.
the key thing. That like if we had the same quality of stuff today, it would be just as expensive, if not more expensive today than it was back then. It's just simply that both laws and cultural taste have degraded to the point where we literally allow the existence of such crappy stuff such that it can be cheap, you know?
Mhm.
The crap would have been cheap 100 years ago too, right? Like it's just crap. That's the whole point. It's not cheaper, it's just crap. So the real question is, can you do something like what can you do when the quality is equivalent?
Mhm.
And I think this is the big issue when people are going on about food and health food. Oh, it's so expensive. Like, no, it's not expensive. It's better.
It's better.
It's
Yeah.
better.
And I think,
Um,
I mean, I've had this conversation with like family members, for example, where, if you've got your iron triangle, it's like, okay, let's pick better and healthy and we're going to sacrifice cheap. But to equalize that, it's like, okay, do you want to be healthier? There's
yeah.
there's the eating the better food component of that. There's also just the not overindulging. And to
Mhm.
the extent that you're not snacking all the time, that's going to counterbalance the fact that
Right.
any given bag of chips might be a couple more dollars.
Well, also, fun fact is that we didn't get into this as far as the seed oil symptoms are concerned, but they because the body learns to not recognize them as burnable calories, they don't fill you up. They get stored in your body fat, all right, but they don't actually satiate you because your body's like, oh, I'm not going to use this. And one of the interesting studies, again, an inadvertent conclusion of a study that was trying to find something else entirely, but it betrays the truth, which I think is very entertaining. um, is that they fed a bunch of kids, like they told a bunch of kids, hey, like eat whatever you want until you're full. And there were of course a bunch of different groups, and it was always like a carb plus a fat, and the carb plus saturated fat was like a baked potato and butter, I think. Those kids ate the least number of calories of that combination before they were full. And it was a non-trivial number of calories. It was like 300 something at lunchtime, which
Mm.
if you think about a 300 calorie delta for a kid is what, it's a 450 calorie delta for an adult.
Mhm.
3 meals a day, 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year. That's a lot of caloric surplus. And of course, people are like, "Oh, we're eating too many calories. We're not burning it, so we're getting fat." Yeah, you're eating too many calories, but they're calories that your body wasn't going to burn anyway. They're going straight to your body fat to get locked away, like the Beast and Beauty and the Beast, hidden away from the world because they'll tear apart anything that they touch. So we're eating far more calories, and so yeah, our snacks, of course, are more satiating. And for an equivalent number of ounces, you'll be much more full if you eat our stuff than someone else. But again, this is all a long preface to say that there are a lot of things that go into making food expensive or cheap that have nothing to do with ingredient quality. And I guess it's probably interesting. I'll try to summarize them quickly. One of them is on the grocery store shelves. The retailer takes a margin, right? Everyone probably is aware vaguely how this works. Um, grocery store, whatever, grocery store buys chips for $5 and they put them on sale for $10 and they pocket the difference. So Frito-Lay is so big and they own so many big brands that they have pressured the retailers that carry them, which is, of course, every retailer, to be satisfied with a lower margin than competing chip brands. So if Frito-Lay sells chips for $5 to a store, they'll get on shelf for $7. Whereas if I sell chips for $5 to a store, they'll get on sale or they'll get on shelf for $9 or $10. And
Mm.
that's a big difference because the customer doesn't know any of this. They
Right. The,
just
the customer already knows the one brand. They're more likely to buy it, a priori. And so they're taking advantage of that brand
yeah,
recognition.
they're just buying it and they buy the cheaper thing. But like they'll if they spend $5 versus on chips, their Frito-Lay is getting more of that when it's a Frito-Lay product than another brand selling a different product.
Mm.
So yeah, I can have the same price as Frito-Lay, literally $10 Moss chips, $10 Frito-Lay, and I will make less money when you buy that thing versus a Frito-Lay if you bought the Frito-Lay one. So that's another thing. And of course, I can't just make less money because we need to exist. And so that means the price on shelf has to be higher. And so people see that. And that's like a sort of, I don't know if you call this corruption or collusion or whatever, but that's like a kind of thing that Frito-Lay is able to do because there's somewhat of a monopoly in the chip aisle. Um, Another big thing is government subsidies. So you think that my food is expensive and Frito-Lay's food is cheap. Well, you're not necessarily entirely correct because you just already paid for Frito-Lay's food in the form of your tax dollars going to agricultural subsidies for
Mm.
corn and soy, as we talked about earlier. Those agricultural subsidies funded by the USDA do not make their way into organic corn and grass-fed beef tallow, unfortunately. Unsurprisingly, of course, but unfortunately. And so you think, obviously, you can't pay fewer taxes, but you do theoretically have some amount of influence over governmental policy through you or your politicians. And so you're already paying for the ingredients just ahead of time in April of every year, as opposed to the grocery store shelf. Um, so I suppose the answer to this, of course, is get big enough that like we can buy our own government corruption, and so then we can just do the opposite in our favor, or like just kill the subsidies. I'm sure there seem to be some politicians that have been talking about doing this recently, which I think is interesting. Kill the subsidies, however that means politically. Obviously, not a ton of impact to the individual customer, but at least it's worth knowing. Another thing is uh, scale, right? So Frito-Lay has 35 production facilities in America. That's basically like almost, one in two-thirds of every two-thirds of states, they have a Frito-Lay production facility. They have 200 distribution facilities and like a fleet of thousands of trucks that drop ship Frito-Lay products to every corner of the country. Um, Economies of scale, economics 101. The more stuff you can make, the cheaper unit price you're able to make it at. You can spread out your fixed costs over a wider revenue base, yada, yada, yada. So anyway, their factories are like a bunch of robots all over the country. making stuff with minimal human oversight and then driving
Hmm.
it nearby without spending a ton of money on fuel because they have factories everywhere. In contrast, we have a small facility with a bunch of people who make it by hand. Like I probably have the same number of employees as a single Frito-Lay factory, and I make like 1,000 times more than I do, right? We just don't have much automation. We're working on it, and that's going to be a big driver of actual cost savings. Not ingredients, it's just like literal labor
Hmm.
and like production automation. But I don't have it yet. And so we have to pay a bunch of people literally to fry chips by hand, like with a fryer, like
Hmm.
they're
Hmm.
working at a restaurant. Obviously, very costly. In fact, the single most expensive line item in the cost structure of a masa chips bag is the labor it took to make it and not the tallow or whatever. Obviously, tallow is more expensive. Not going to say it's not, but it's labor that is easily automatable if you had enough capital, and that's just like a scaling question. Um, and I think the last thing is similar. It's basically like supply chain, right? I believe 3% of corn or less, something like that, in America is grown organically. Grass-fed cows represent, I think, less than 10% of all cattle in the country. Maybe it's less than 5%. Um, the industry is just not very big. And so the seed oil industry is very big. And the bigger the industry is, the cheaper it's able to make its commodities. And so in 10 years, when regenerative farming becomes the norm, it'll probably be easier to obtain regenerative farmed products at lower prices. But for now, that's not the case. Although I think just given the nature of regenerative agriculture, like you will never have infinite scaling benefits because
Hmm.
a regenerative farm is limited in possible scale.
Oh, and so where can people like buy your stuff?
We have about 200 grocery stores, like small, like health food stores and whatnot, but mo the vast majority of our customers are online. Amazon too, but our
Hmm.
website's mosschips.com and vandycrisp.com for the potato chips.
Um, Stephen, is there anything that you want to reiterate for people or any final thoughts you want to leave them with to do with, seed oils or just food and diet in general? Anything that we talked about?
Yeah, I think the most important insight, honestly, is understanding this idea of like health should be easy. Um, so obviously the world is kind of shitty, and so there's only so much you can do. But I think it's incumbent, if you want to succeed in being healthy, you have to do the work to make that easy for you in the future. So whether that's like figuring out where the farms near you are or the farmers market is, like doing the work to get like getting a water filter, getting rid of all your plastic clothing, finding a place to live that's like lower pollution, learning how to cook, getting a bunch of recipes, whatever. Do the hard work so then your life can be easy. Because if you're always stressed out about being healthy, you're never gonna be healthy. I think that's the key. And obviously, that's the world we're trying to build and make it easier for people. But that's not gonna happen overnight, unfortunately.
All right. Well, Stephen Rofrano, thanks for your time, man. And thanks for sharing everything.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you for having me on here.